When 6-year-old Lily Ann Carter stepped into her psychologist's office on a rainy Tuesday morning, no one expected her tiny voice to upend an entire town. She sat stiffly on the edge of the worn leather couch, her small fingers wrapped tightly around the sleeves of her pink sweater. Her mother, Rachel Carter, sat across the room, watching with eyes clouded by worry and exhaustion. It wasn't just the nightmares or Lily's sudden fear of being alone that brought them here. It was something deeper. Something Rachel couldn't name but could feel in her bones. Just days earlier, Lily had returned from her bi-weekly weekend visit with her father, Gregory Shaw, a well-known figure in the community. He was charming, successful, and widely respected. But when Lily came home that Sunday evening, something about her had changed. The sparkle in her eyes had dimmed. She flinched when Rachel reached to brush her hair. She no longer wanted to sleep in her own room. Rachel asked her gently over and over, "Did something happen, sweetheart?" Lily just shook her head, silent, afraid. Now, in the softly lit room of Dr. Susan Monroe, a child psychologist with years of experience, Lily was finally ready to speak. Dr. Monroe didn't rush her. She waited, patient, kind, and steady. And then, in a voice so small it barely reached the corners of the room, Lily said, "Daddy told me not to tell, but he touched me in the places only mommy should." Rachel gasped. Her heart dropped like a stone and tears welled in her eyes. Dr. Monroe's expression didn't change. She'd heard confessions like this before, each one unique, devastating, and world-altering. But she also knew what had to happen next. Within minutes, she quietly stepped into her office, picked up the phone, and dialed 911. Rachel held Lily tightly as sirens echoed faintly in the distance, unaware that her daughter's bravery had just set off a chain reaction that would rip through every hidden corner of their small Illinois town. What began as a whisper from a frightened little girl would soon become a reckoning, and a fight for justice that no one saw coming. The moment Dr. Susan Monroe ended the emergency call to dispatch, the atmosphere inside her office shifted. It was no longer a quiet space of exploration and healing. It had become the front line of something far bigger, something darker. Rachel Carter sat motionless on the couch, her arms tightly wrapped around her daughter, Lily. She could feel the tiny heartbeat pounding against her chest. The girl had said so little, and yet those few fragile words, "Daddy told me not to tell," echoed in Rachel's mind like a scream in a canyon. Dr. Monroe returned from her office calm but firm. "The authorities are on their way. I've also contacted a child advocacy team. They'll take it from here with compassion and care. But Rachel," she paused, locking eyes with her, "you need to prepare yourself. This will be difficult." Rachel nodded, her throat tight. "Whatever it takes," she whispered. "I believe her. I won't let anyone bury this." Within 20 minutes, 2 officers from the Riverside County Sheriff's Department arrived, along with a social worker from Child Protective Services and a forensic interviewer trained in trauma-informed care. Their arrival was swift but professional. No flashing lights, no raised voices. This wasn't a crime scene yet. It was a fragile moment that required gentleness. Lily was taken into a separate room with a warm, soft chair and a dollhouse in the corner. The forensic interviewer, a woman named April Gaines, knelt beside her and introduced herself like an old friend. She didn't ask direct questions. She didn't press. She simply created space. Lily, still clinging to the edges of her safety, opened up, little by little. Enough. The team listened, documented, and immediately put together an emergency protective plan. Within hours, a court order was filed. Gregory Shaw was temporarily barred from any contact with Lily pending a full investigation. Rachel would retain sole custody. Rachel exhaled for the first time in days, but it was far from over. That evening, after Lily had fallen asleep in her mother's bed clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit, Rachel sat at the kitchen table with Officer Mark Delaney, a quiet man in his 40s with a patient voice and kind eyes. He explained what came next. Medical examinations, digital forensic investigations, interviews with friends, teachers, and anyone who had spent time with Gregory Shaw and Lily together. "We need to build this case carefully," he said. "Predators like him, if that's what he is, they know how to hide. And men like him, high profile, polished, respected, they've built armor, but we'll find the cracks." Rachel stared at the steam rising from her untouched cup of coffee. "She's only 6, she said. "How does this even happen to a 6-year-old? Officer Delaney didn't respond. He'd heard that question too many times, and he never had a satisfying answer. Outside, the autumn wind howled through the streets of Riverside. Somewhere across town, Gregory Shaw sat in his 3-story colonial home, unaware that his perfect world was beginning to crumble. That the story he thought he controlled was no longer his to spin. That night, Rachel wrote a note to herself in a journal she hadn't opened in years. It said, "Today, Lily was brave. Tomorrow I will be too." The investigation had only just begun, but something irreversible had already happened. A child's voice had been heard, believed, and protected. For the first time in far too long, justice stirred in the heart of a quiet American town. The courtroom felt colder than Rachel Carter expected. Not because of the polished marble floors or the humming air conditioner overhead, but because of who sat just a few feet away. Gregory Shaw, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, with a smug calmness on his face as if none of this mattered. As if he were here out of inconvenience, not consequence. Rachel sat beside her attorney, clutching a tissue damp from her shaking hands. Lily wasn't present, thank God, but her voice echoed in every legal document spread across the judge's bench. Words like inappropriate touching, trauma response, and emergency protection order carried more weight than any of them should. Still, the man sitting across from her kept his smile intact, unshaken. Gregory's lawyer, a polished defense attorney named Carson Whitmore, didn't waste time. "Your Honor," he began smoothly, "my client has no criminal history, no prior complaints, and is an upstanding member of this community. What we're seeing here is a deeply unfortunate case of parental alienation, a tactic often used during bitter custody disputes to turn a child against one parent." Rachel's stomach twisted. There it was. The narrative Gregory had carefully crafted, that she was vindictive, unstable, desperate for control, that Lily had been coached, that none of it was real. But then came Rachel's attorney, Dina Morales, sharp, composed, and fiercely protective. "Your Honor," she said firmly, "Lily is 6 years old. She made multiple consistent disclosures to trained professionals, not just her mother. A forensic interview was conducted with no parent present, and the child expressed fear, shame, and described behavior far beyond anything a 6-year-old should ever have to understand. This is not parental alienation, this is trauma, and if the court fails to act decisively, it will be complicit." The room fell silent. Judge Eleanor Grant, a seasoned but visibly exhausted woman in her early 60s, studied the evidence for several long seconds. Rachel watched her eyes move across photos of Lily's drawings, transcripts of her statements, a psychological evaluation, and the CPS report that had prompted the emergency no-contact order. But law was slow, cautious, often too cautious. "I'm placing a temporary restriction on Mr. Shaw's visitation," Judge Grant finally declared. "Supervised visits only at a licensed facility. No overnights, no physical contact unless permitted by the supervisor. We will reconvene in 30 days. Rachel wanted to scream. Only 30 days? Lily had begged not to see her father again. She had hidden in closets at night, terrified he would come take her away. And now the court had handed him a door, just slightly ajar but still open. Gregory's team smirked. They had expected worse. As Rachel walked out of the courtroom, her knees barely held her weight. Dina placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "This is a win," she said quietly. "Not the one we wanted, but we have momentum. Stay strong." Outside, the press waited with cameras and microphones, eager for quotes. Gregory's attorney gave a brief statement. "Mr. Shaw remains confident that the truth will prevail." Rachel said nothing. She held Lily's stuffed bunny in her purse, the one she had gripped while disclosing everything to Dr. Monroe. The truth had already prevailed in her daughter's voice. The rest of the world was just slow to catch up. But Rachel knew one thing: she wouldn't stop. Not until Lily was safe. Not until Gregory Shaw could never hurt another child again. There's a special kind of silence in a small town. The kind that doesn't protect you. It strangles you. It started with the stares. The prolonged glances at the grocery store. The way conversation stopped when Rachel Carter walked into the coffee shop on Main Street. People didn't say anything, not directly, but they didn't need to. The whispers followed her like smoke clinging to clothes after a fire. And in the middle of that smoke was her daughter, Lily. Gregory Shaw had built a legacy in Riverside, Illinois, coaching Little League, sponsoring church renovations, even donating the funds for the new playground behind the elementary school. He was a name you dropped in board meetings. He was the father other men wanted to be seen golfing with on Saturdays. So when Rachel accused him of abuse, the town didn't ask what happened. They asked what she wanted. People muttered about custody games, about bitter exes and manipulative mothers, about women who weaponized their children. Rachel had heard it all. Her landlord asked, politely of course, if she would consider relocating when the lease expired in 2 months. Her friend of 8 years, Marla Jennings, stopped returning her texts. Even Lily's dance class became hostile territory. Mothers whispered as they helped their daughters change shoes, as if Lily's presence alone was infectious. "She's just trying to ruin Greg's life," someone said behind her once at the local pharmacy. Rachel didn't turn around. She didn't need to know who said it. She already knew. But none of it compared to the conversation she had with her own mother. Rachel had called her from the kitchen one night after putting Lily to bed, voice trembling with exhaustion. "Mom, do you believe me? Do you believe her?" There was a pause, a long one. "I believe you believe her," her mother finally said. It shattered her more than any courtroom decision. Still, Rachel kept showing up. To the hearings, to therapy, to supervised visitation centers where Gregory sat smugly in a monitored room, his charm flickering like a gaslight in front of the court-appointed observer. Lily would sit frozen, answering with short words and nervous glances. Rachel wanted to scream every time she had to hand her daughter over to that place, even for an hour. She begged the system to listen. She showed them drawings Lily made, transcripts from therapy, the night terrors that wouldn't stop. But the system was cautious, slow, afraid of overreach. Gregory's reputation was armor, and Rachel's truth was just one mother's voice. Then came the article. An anonymous journalist from a regional outlet published a piece titled "The Coach, the Custody Case, and the Child's Cry for Help." It recounted everything without names, but the town knew. It painted a picture not of a guilty man, but of a community unwilling to protect its children if it meant questioning its heroes. That changed things. Slowly, one evening after picking Lily up from school, Rachel found a note stuck under her windshield wiper. "I believe you. I believe her. You're not alone. A mom who sees you." Rachel stood in the school parking lot, holding that note in trembling hands, tears forming for the first time in days. It was the smallest gesture, and it meant the world. A few days later, another parent approached her at the park. Tony Ramirez, whose son had once played on Gregory's baseball team. "My kid said something," he said hesitantly. "A while ago, I thought he was just confused, but now—" His voice broke. "Now I'm not so sure." More calls followed, more parents, more stories. None as detailed as Lily's, but enough to form a pattern. A terrifying, undeniable pattern. The sheriff's department reopened old reports that had been dismissed too quickly. A digital forensics team was granted a search warrant for Gregory's personal devices. Rachel didn't sleep that night. She sat on the floor of Lily's room, watching her daughter breathe, afraid of hope but unable to stop it from creeping back in. Then 3 days later, Officer Mark Delaney called. "We found something," he said. His voice was steady but different now, sharper, certain. "It's enough." Rachel didn't cry. Not then. She just sat down, her hands gripping the edge of the kitchen counter. She had been doubted, discarded, humiliated, and now, finally, heard. The town still whispered. But the whispers had changed. Some in support, others in shame. The lines were shifting. People who once looked away were now questioning themselves. Questioning Gregory. Questioning the entire system that allowed his mask to stay on for so long. And Rachel? She didn't care about vindication. She cared about Lily. And Lily was still scared, still healing. But she no longer flinched when Rachel tucked her in at night. She no longer avoided eye contact. She had started humming again, soft little tunes from her favorite bedtime stories. One evening, Lily asked, "Mommy, are the bad people going away?" Rachel looked at her daughter's wide, vulnerable eyes, and finally she could say, "Yes, baby, they are." When the first mother came forward, Rachel Carter didn't know whether to feel relief or heartbreak. It was a Tuesday morning, gray and cool, the kind of day where nothing feels urgent and everything feels just a bit too quiet. Rachel was walking Lily into school when a woman she didn't recognize approached her outside the building. She looked hesitant. Late 30s, hair tied back, dark circles under her eyes. The kind of woman who had carried something heavy for far too long. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "You're Lily's mom, right?" Rachel nodded cautiously. "My name is Danielle Marks. My daughter Ava, she used to play at Gregory Shaw's house a few years ago. I didn't think anything of it at the time. He was coaching her older brother's team, and he offered to watch her after practice once or twice. I thought he was just being helpful." She paused, took a breath. "Last night, Ava had a nightmare. She told me she hated men with beards. Greg has a beard. I asked her why, and she said..." Danielle's voice cracked. "She said he touched her. She said he told her not to tell." Rachel didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Danielle's eyes filled with tears. "I just needed you to know you're not alone, and neither is Lily." 2 days later, another family came forward. A father this time, Anthony Ellis, whose twin sons had both played under Gregory in Little League. The boys, now 10, had grown quiet and anxious in ways their parents couldn't explain. It wasn't until they saw Gregory's photo on the news that they began to talk. "He told us it was a secret game," one of the boys said during an interview. "He said it was part of being on the team." As more disclosures emerged, the narrative began to shift, not just in the media, but in the very bones of Riverside. People who had once defended Gregory Shaw began to grow quiet. The confident smiles of his attorney faded from courthouse steps. Former friends turned off their phones. Sponsors withdrew support. The man who had once stood tall in the center of the community was now a shadow. People crossed the street to avoid. The police, bolstered by the new allegations, requested a second search warrant, this time for Gregory's cloud storage, deleted files, even external drives found at his law office. What they found was sickening. Dozens of encrypted folders, video files, images, chat logs, evidence that removed all doubt. Detectives and digital forensic analysts worked around the clock. Rachel sat with Officer Mark Delaney again, this time not in desperation but in grim understanding. "He's been doing this for years," Delaney said, rubbing his temples. "And he's careful, selective, manipulative. He built trust with the kids, with the parents. That's how he got away with it." Rachel felt numb. There was a weight in her chest, but not the kind that made her crumble. It was the kind that hardened you, tempered you. That week, a special victims task force was assembled to handle the multiple cases. Gregory was arrested at his home without incident, wearing the same smug expression he'd worn in court, until the lead detective began reading off the charges. Multiple counts of aggravated criminal sexual abuse, possession of illicit material involving minors, and endangering the welfare of a child. The charges weren't from just one child anymore. There were 6 victims, and more were being interviewed. Gregory's attorney tried to spin the narrative that the investigation was politically motivated, that evidence was misinterpreted, that a once beloved man was being destroyed by mass hysteria. But the evidence was airtight. His lawyer knew it, the prosecution knew it. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Rachel saw fear in Gregory Shaw's eyes. When the district attorney's office offered a plea deal, 20 years without parole if Gregory waived his right to trial, his team advised him to take it. They knew a jury trial would mean dozens of testimonies from children, from mothers, from doctors and therapists who had pieced together every pattern he had tried so hard to bury. He took the deal. Rachel didn't attend the sentencing. She stayed home with Lily, who was busy drawing rainbows and suns with orange crayons. There was peace in the house now. Not complete, not permanent, but real. Later that night, Rachel received an email. It was from Ava Marks's mother. She smiled again today. A real one. I didn't think I'd ever see that smile again. "Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for letting your daughter be heard." Rachel stared at the message for a long time. She thought about all the times she'd been called a liar, all the times people looked away, all the times she nearly doubted herself. And now, the silence was breaking, not just in her own life, but in the lives of families who had suffered in the dark. She knew the healing would take years, maybe decades, but it had begun, and it all started with a little girl who whispered the truth, and a mother who refused to let the world ignore it. For months, Gregory Shaw wore the same expression, a calm, smug confidence that sat on his face like a well-tailored suit. It was the smile of a man who had spent his life being untouchable, respected, admired, trusted. He wasn't worried, not really, not even as the list of victims grew. He still believed the system would protect him. But on a chilly morning in November, that smile finally cracked. It happened in a beige conference room deep inside the Riverside Police Department, where two detectives and a digital forensic expert named Logan Price sat hunched over a laptop connected to one of Gregory's recovered external drives. They had combed through thousands of encrypted files, months of tedious, agonizing work. Some folders were empty, others filled with generic documents, but one particular file stood out. It was deeply buried, double encrypted, and labeled with a simple name, G_memo_backup. Logan cracked the password on his third try. Inside was a goldmine of damning evidence. Meticulously organized digital records, videos, images, handwritten notes scanned from journals, even voice memos Gregory had recorded for himself. Each one was a thread in a tapestry of darkness that he had quietly curated for years. It was more than just proof, it was a confession. One file in particular made the room go silent. A video, time-stamped from 3 years ago, showed Gregory inside what looked like a garage, speaking directly to the camera. "I keep everything because I don't trust the world to understand what I'm doing," he said, his voice calm as if he were explaining a business plan. "They wouldn't get it. But this is about control, power. I'm not hurting them. I'm teaching them to obey. They always come back." Logan felt sick. Detective Cameron Blake, a father of 3, left the room halfway through the second clip. He didn't speak for a long time afterward. That afternoon, the police chief, the district attorney, and the entire task force gathered for an emergency briefing. The contents of the files were shared in limited capacity, just enough to confirm the breadth and nature of the abuse. It was no longer a question of he said, she said. The man had documented his own crimes with the arrogance of someone who believed he would never be caught. And now he was. The news reached Rachel Carter late that night in a single phone call. "He recorded everything," Officer Delaney said, his voice hollow. "He built his own case against himself." Rachel didn't speak for several seconds. She stood in the hallway outside Lily's bedroom, staring at the nightlight glowing on the wall. "So, what happens now?" "We're moving forward with the maximum charges. He's not going to trial. We'll offer him one deal. 20 years, no parole for 15, full registration. If he refuses, we'll take this to court, and the footage will become public record." Rachel shivered. Not out of fear, but cold clarity. This was it, the moment she'd been fighting for. It was messy, horrifying, but it was real. 3 days later, Gregory Shaw sat in an interview room at the county jail, flanked by his attorney and 2 prosecutors. They laid out the evidence, methodically, quietly, without drama. When they played the video, his video, Gregory didn't blink. He didn't flinch, but the color drained from his face. His attorney looked at him. "You won't survive trial. Take the deal." Gregory finally nodded. The plea agreement was signed within 48 hours. 20 years in a federal facility. No parole until at least year 15. Lifetime registration as a sex offender. Permanent loss of all parental rights. No contact with any minors for life. The man who once coached Riverside's championship Little League team was now just another inmate with a number stitched into his uniform. When Rachel heard the news, she sat down at her kitchen table and cried, not from grief, but from release. The weight she'd carried for so long had finally begun to lift. That night she told Lily, "He won't come back, sweetheart, not ever." Lily looked up from her drawing. "Promise?" Rachel wrapped her arms around her and whispered, "I promise." In the weeks that followed, the story spread like wildfire across the state. News stations ran headlines like, "Riverside's Golden Boy Unmasked, a Town's Reckoning," "Coach, Father, Predator, The Secret Life of Gregory Shaw." People who had once doubted Rachel now sent apology letters. Parents reevaluated their own children's stories. Churches and schools hosted emergency safety trainings. The local PTA launched a Listen First campaign, encouraging families to believe kids even when the truth feels uncomfortable. But for Rachel, none of that was about vindication. It was about Lily. It was about Ava and the Ellis twins and every other child who had been silenced. Gregory Shaw had thought he was smarter than the system, smarter than the truth. But in the end, it was the truth, patient, relentless, and quietly waiting in the shadows, that brought him down. The courtroom was packed. Not with reporters or media vans this time, but with parents, teachers, survivors, and quiet onlookers who had once trusted Gregory Shaw with their children, their community, their respect. Some came out of obligation, others out of disbelief. A few, like Rachel Carter, came because they needed to see it end with their own eyes. Gregory was brought into the courtroom in handcuffs, wearing an orange jumpsuit that swallowed his once polished image. The man who had once smiled at charity auctions and knelt down to tie kids' shoelaces before baseball practice now looked like a ghost of himself, pale, hunched, and utterly hollow. He didn't look at anyone. The judge, Honorable Patricia Langford, didn't waste time. She had reviewed the plea deal, the victim statements, the digital evidence, and the psychiatric evaluations. She had seen enough darkness in this case to last a lifetime. Before the sentencing, she allowed victim impact statements. One by one, parents came forward. Danielle Marks, whose daughter Ava had suffered in silence for years, spoke through trembling hands. "You told her it was a game. You told her she was special," she said, staring straight at Gregory. "And when she cried, you told her to keep your secret. But she's not carrying that secret anymore. I am." Then came Anthony Ellis, holding a picture of his twin boys. "They don't want to play baseball anymore, not even in the yard. You stole that from them, but worse than the game, you stole their trust. You taught them that adults lie, that adults hurt, that adults walk away without consequences." And finally, Rachel Carter stepped forward. She didn't bring notes. She didn't prepare a speech. She brought one thing, Lily's drawing. It was a crayon picture of a girl standing in front of a monster with sharp teeth. Above the girl was a glowing star and the words in shaky handwriting, "I said no, and someone listened." Rachel held it up to the court. "My daughter was 6 when she told the truth. You were 51 when you hid from it. And yet, she was braver than you ever were. She saved lives, and you destroyed them. I don't care how long you spend in a cell. What matters to me is that when she goes to sleep at night, she knows the monster is locked away." Judge Langford took a long pause before delivering her sentence. "Gregory Shaw, by your own admission and through overwhelming evidence, you have caused irreparable harm to multiple children, families, and to the trust placed in you by an entire community. You used your influence to manipulate, your access to exploit, and your silence to conceal." She looked him squarely in the eye. "For these crimes, you are hereby sentenced to 20 years in federal prison, without the possibility of parole for 15 years. You will be registered as a sex offender for life, prohibited from contact with minors, and barred from employment or involvement in any child-related organization or activity." There was no applause, no celebration, just silence, and then a collective exhale. Gregory was escorted out of the courtroom, head bowed. For the first time, he looked defeated, small, as if the walls he'd built around himself, walls made of reputation, money, charm, had finally crumbled under the weight of truth. After the hearing, Rachel stepped outside into the crisp December air. She stood on the courthouse steps, holding Lily's drawing in her hands, and stared up at the sky. She didn't feel victorious, she didn't feel whole, but she felt lighter. She felt finished. Later that week, the Riverside Unified School District held a town hall meeting. Parents gathered to discuss sweeping changes in child protection policies, new background check protocols, mandatory abuse prevention training, and a district-wide campaign called Hear Their Voice, inspired by Lily's words. Rachel was invited to speak, but she declined. She didn't want a podium. She didn't want attention. She wanted Lily to have a childhood. Instead, she sent a letter read aloud by Officer Delaney. "When my daughter first spoke up, she was terrified no one would believe her. What made the difference wasn't evidence or lawyers, it was that someone listened. Really listened. Every child deserves that. Every parent, teacher, coach, or neighbor must be ready to hear even the hardest truths, because silence protects no one. But listening saves lives." The room fell still, and just like that, the conversation in Riverside began to shift. Not in headlines, but in classrooms, living rooms, and church basements. People talked to their kids differently. They believed faster. They asked better questions. A few weeks later, Lily brought home a gold star sticker from her therapist. "I'm brave," she said proudly, sticking it on the fridge next to a new drawing. This one showed a girl with a cape standing next to a heart. No monsters, just light. Rachel knelt beside her and smiled. "You're not just brave, baby, you're a hero." And she meant every word. Because in a courtroom where justice was spoken, and in a town learning how to heal, the most powerful voice had belonged to a 6-year-old girl who whispered the truth and changed everything. Healing didn't come all at once. It came in moments, in breath. In quiet mornings when Lily didn't wake up screaming, in grocery trips where Rachel no longer felt eyes burning into her back, in the soft murmur of wind through the backyard trees, untouched by gossip, untouched by shame. It had been 4 months since Gregory Shaw was sentenced. 4 months since the courtroom doors closed behind him, and Rachel Carter felt the world pause just long enough to exhale. But justice, as necessary as it was, didn't erase the past. It simply made room for something new to grow. Lily was growing too. She was 7 now, taller, chattier, more curious. She'd started taking art classes at the community center, where she painted bright scenes of oceans, forests, and sunlit castles. Her therapist said she was doing well, remarkably well, all things considered. But the scars were still there, invisible but undeniable. Certain noises still made her flinch, certain questions still brought silence. But she was learning to trust again, and more importantly, to feel safe. Rachel, on the other hand, was still learning how to breathe. She often found herself standing in the hallway outside Lily's bedroom watching her sleep. Sometimes she would cry, not out of sadness, but out of sheer gratitude that her daughter survived, that she spoke up, that someone listened, and that Rachel, no matter how afraid, had chosen to fight. She'd quit her old job at the insurance agency. Too many memories. Too many people who had once doubted her and now looked at her like a cautionary tale. Instead, she began working part-time at the Riverside Advocacy Center, helping other parents navigate systems she once found suffocating. It was there she met Tracy, a single mom whose son had recently made his own disclosure. "I don't know what to do," Tracy whispered one day in the break room, tears in her coffee. "I'm scared they won't believe me." Rachel reached across the table, her voice steady. "They will, and if they don't, you fight until they do." Riverside was changing too. In the aftermath of Gregory Shaw's conviction, the town faced a collective reckoning. The school board initiated mandatory trauma-informed training for all faculty and staff. The Little League program underwent a full leadership overhaul, and every youth sports coach was now required to pass a yearly abuse prevention course. But more importantly, parents were listening differently. They didn't brush off strange behavior anymore. They didn't dismiss nightmares or anxiety as just a phase. Conversations around the dinner table shifted, from grades and chores to boundaries and feelings, to consent, to trust. And from the darkness, something remarkable emerged, a community-wide campaign called "You're Safe Here." The campaign featured posters in schools, libraries, and even local diners. Bright colors, simple words, smiling faces of children, real and drawn. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't corporate, it was personal. And in the center of it all was a single quote. "I said no and someone listened." Lily, age 6. Rachel had hesitated when they first asked to use it. She didn't want her daughter turned into a symbol. But then Lily overheard the phone call and looked up from her crayons. "You can use my words," she said simply, "so other kids know it's okay." Rachel nodded, tears in her throat. One Saturday morning, Rachel took Lily to a park across town, the new one, rebuilt with safety cameras and shaded benches. As they walked past the mural on the brick wall, Lily stopped. It was a painting of children holding hands, surrounded by stars and warm light. At the bottom were those familiar words. Lily tilted her head, then smiled. "That's me," she said, proud. "Yes, baby," Rachel whispered. "That's you." They sat on the swings for a while, sunlight breaking through the branches. Rachel watched as Lily pumped her legs back and forth, higher and higher, laughing into the wind. It was the sound Rachel had feared she'd never hear again. That afternoon, Rachel wrote in the journal she kept hidden in her closet. She didn't write often anymore, but this day felt worthy. We are still healing, but we are no longer hiding. The storm didn't break us, it broke the silence. And from that silence we built something new. We are not just survivors, we are builders, listeners, protectors, and we are still here. As spring returned to Riverside, flowers bloomed a little brighter. Sidewalks felt safer. And in the heart of it all, a little girl named Lily was no longer afraid to speak. She had found her voice, and the world finally had learned how to listen. They say time heals all wounds, but that's not quite true. Time alone doesn't mend what's broken. It's what we do with time, how we choose to listen, to protect, to love, that brings healing. Rachel Carter didn't set out to be a warrior. She was just a mother trying to protect her child. But through her, an entire community learned that silence doesn't keep us safe. Truth does. That justice isn't just a courtroom sentence. It's every moment we choose to believe a voice smaller than our own. What happened to Lily should have never happened. But in her bravery, she became more than a victim. She became a catalyst, a spark, a reminder that children are not too small to tell the truth, and adults are not too powerful to escape it. Riverside, Illinois is still standing. The streets haven't changed. The school is still there. The playground still fills with laughter. But beneath the surface, something has changed. People now know what to look for. People now know how to speak up. Because one child dared to whisper, "I said no." And someone listened. Life lesson. Every voice matters. This story isn't just about one predator or one courtroom win. It's about the power of one voice, one child, one mother, one act of courage that rippled through silence and shook an entire community awake. It reminds us that being nice is not the same as being good, that appearances can deceive, and that real strength isn't shown in control. It's shown in compassion, in accountability, and in the willingness to protect those who can't protect themselves. If you are a parent, a teacher, a neighbor, or even just someone watching from the sidelines, listen. Listen when a child says something feels wrong. Don't brush it off. Don't second-guess your instincts. Because believing someone in their most vulnerable moment can change their life, and maybe even save it. And if you've been through pain like this, if your voice was ever ignored, dismissed, or doubted, I want you to know this. You were always worth believing. You are still worth believing. And your healing matters, no matter how long it takes. If this story moved you, please leave a comment and share your thoughts. Have you ever witnessed courage like Lily's, or had to fight like Rachel did? Your words might be the light someone else needs to see today. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true stories that speak to the heart. Because here we don't just tell stories, we give silence a voice. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a moment that could change someone's life.